Hello, everyone. Thanks for joining us on a Friday afternoon. And today happens to also be World Sleep Day. This being a Friday afternoon lunchtime, we thought, okay, let's not send you all to sleep. Let's try and make this interactive. So I've got some, probably you can say maybe a little bit gamified way of learning about inclusion and accessibility. So it's going to be very discussion based. It's not just about me talking to you. I don't want to do that. I want to hear from everybody as well, thoughts on inclusion and accessibility as we progress through the next 1 hour. So my name is Rashmi. I'm a senior user research consultant. I work with Accenture, Next Gen Engineering, which is the engineering part or the bit within Accenture. And I've been consulting with NHS England. So I lead the user research for the whole DigiTrials program, which is to do with clinical trials for people in the UK. So that's the bit about me. So what brings me here today to share my knowledge or my experience on inclusion and accessibility. I don't have any formal training on this and such. Whatever I've learned about accessibility is through my background. My background is in user experience design. And even before that, previously, I started off my career in graphic design ages ago. So I've very much learned on the job. I've very much learned by speaking with people who have access needs in particular, who have taught me a lot, because that's how I've learned to see things from their perspective, from their thinking, because there's no way I can see or find those difficulties if without that lived experience. So I think lived experience is the biggest teacher, and to learn from people with lived experiences. So coming from there, so just want to hear a bit of what brings you here today. So if I'm going to start sharing my screen so we can go to those parts of the board that we will interact with. You should start to see this anytime. Let me know if you are. Yeah. All okay. Right. Okay. So I'm just scrolling down on this board. And what I invite you all to put down your thoughts on here on the panel, why inclusion and accessibility matters to us. So maybe a few words coming from each of you on what this means to yourself, be it at daily life or at work. How does this impact you? I would have put some music on, but I don't have I don't have the ability to do that. If someone wants to speak it and not type, that is fine as well. So please also raise your hand or let me know if you're struggling to interact with this Miro board. I can go through some maybe basics of how to use this board if anybody would like that. We've got quite a few UX designers here on the call. And I see a comment here, somebody working in social media, need content to be accessible to everyone. That's great, because that's one of the things I will be covering off later in the section. We will have a little exercise to do with what makes the written language more or less accessible, more or less readable, and how can we get that written language to become more readable. So there are lots of tools we can use. So I will go into that as well, how we can shape our language to become more accessible. Yes, I also see some comments here on neurodivergent, being neurodivergent, or having friends, colleagues who we have seen on the neurodiverse spectrum. And there is also the new thought that there is no such thing such as neurotypical, that we all are somewhere on the spectrum. And therefore, designing for neurodiversity is part of that inclusive design landscape. Yeah, and absolutely, somebody has written, you really can't say your site is usable unless it's accessible. That is very true. I will also go into what is the difference between accessibility and inclusion or inclusivity, how you can be accessible, you can be technically very accessible, but you may not be inclusive at all. So I'll go through some of those examples as well. Yeah, and we all feel like it is so easy to design for basics. One of you have written colorblind, for example, but it's important to go further. And that, despite being the case that how easy it is to get some of these things right, we still see more than 95% of the top accessibility mistakes we often see is to do with color contrast. That's the number one problem. Does anybody want to say on what they've written? Are you all happy with me picking up random pieces of notes here? Yeah, I see another comment here on personally how you find something more engaging with Apple's products, and you would receive better customer feedback if the usability is good, if it is accessible to everyone. So one of you is also, I can see, a front-end developer or has been a front-end developer, accessibility reviewer in your previous job. Do you want to speak more about it? Where was written that? You can go off mute and speak if you like. Yes, we're all absolutely, I'm picking on this post here, tired that accessibility is always kept for last. It shouldn't be the very last, it shouldn't be an afterthought, it should be ingrained in how we think right from the beginning and design for inclusion. And absolutely agree. It not only benefits everyone, it makes experience for users with accessibility needs extraordinarily better. All right, so it's great to see all your thoughts on this, but we'll move on. We'll move on to, I see some of these elements have jumped off the board. So I'm now moving on to define disability itself. If you were to look at how disability is defined, it is classed, a condition is classed as, or a person is classed as being disabled under the Equality Act 2010 if they have a physical or a mental impairment, which has quite a significant impact on their normal day-to-day activities like eating, wearing clothes, brushing teeth, walking, right? So if that has an impact enough to slow you down, or you're not able to do those daily activities, then you are legally classed as a person who's living with a disability. And there's also the thing that it has to be long-term, and how they define long-term is that it is a condition that can affect you for more than a year. And let's not also forget that disability can be visible, it can be hidden, like in neurodiverse conditions. If a person has autism, right, you can't really see these things, or learning disabilities. And also, disabilities can be diagnosed, or they may also be undiagnosed. So I may be living with something that I am not yet aware of. I may find out in 2 years or 5 years. In 5 years, I may develop a new disability because I'm aging, I'm growing older, my eyes will get worse. So these are the things that I do expect for myself. So I have a selfish reason in in promoting accessibility. One being for myself, I'm also growing older. I'm also conscious that I might develop one or two or maybe more disabilities as I grow older. Looking at statistics, that's also what we find. I'm now moving on to just look a little bit into the key facts about disability. Now, I've taken this from the House of Commons library that was published in 2022. It looks at the statistics, number of people who are living with disabilities as of 2019. So if you look at this graph, there is a graph here which has data going from 2002 onwards, and there is an upward trend in the number of people in the UK who are living with disabilities. Now, that could simply be related to the rising population itself. We do not know, but that's most likely the case. So given that is the case, we have like 22% of the people who are living with one or another kind of disability. And if you were to look at disability by age groups, you have some of the data here has gone missing. I see. Okay. So I don't know how that got deleted. But it basically showed younger people have 9%, like in the age of childhood, 9% of disabilities. This 21% is meant to be the working age group, and 42% is meant to be the retired and older age group of people. So just looking at the UK population, UK statistics, it's one, if you look at simplistically, it's 1 in 5 people who have one or another type of disability, but it's actually, in reality, it's more than one, because you can't account for people who haven't self-declared, people who haven't yet been diagnosed. So if you look at all of that, it's more than 1 in 5. I'm now moving on to this other statistic, looking at this globally, right? So it's not just about disability, there's also long-term or chronic conditions. So chronic conditions are health problems that are ongoing for a number of years or decades. They probably have no cure, but can only be managed, but is impacting the individuals in some way. And these conditions are in general controlled with medication and or therapies. So the global ratio of adults living with long-term conditions is 1 in 3. So that's something for us to be aware of as well while we design things on the website or apps for people to use. And if anybody has any questions while I'm speaking, feel free to go off mute or raise your hand and let's talk, let's make it a discussion. I want to talk a little bit on the UK accessibility legislation, which is the law. If some of you who are or might be working for public sector bodies or organizations, clients, and anything that comes out of public sector organizations in terms of services or products, they must be accessible by everyone. That's what we aim for. We aim for accessibility to work for everyone. In reality, it's not possible to achieve it. That's the reason why we continuously test with people who have these lived experiences, because your automatic tools can only catch about 50%. Those are at the most 50 or 55%, but a lot of your accessibility errors in the designs that you are creating are learned through by testing it with people who have access needs. So also the law says that it has to be whatever product you serve for public, it has to be accessible, and you've got to ensure that online content meets the YCAG or the WCAG 2.2 either mostly double A, because single A is just not good enough. Now A, double A, triple A, they are all standards. There are three different standards to meet. Generally, people go for double A standard. Triple A standard is so hard, people are not even willing to invest in it. And what does it mean? What do these four pillars or principles mean? So basically, any information you put out there, which can be read or seen, it has to be perceivable. So it has to be presentable in ways that people can perceive that content. And websites must be functional no matter how they are accessed. If somebody is just tabbing through keys on their keyboard or listening through a screen reader, or they're using a clicker, or they're using a ruler instead of a mouse, they must be able to access your web content in various methods or tools. And the content must be comprehensible. People must be able to understand it. So we'll go a bit into the language and the image part of it later on this session, just looking at how the written content itself can be more or less easy to understand. And given that our technology is changing so fast, and so rapidly, with new technologies coming in, your web content has to simply be robust enough, either looking at it in an assistive way or otherwise, so that it remains robust as our technologies change. And things have to be updated as well very regularly. I'm now moving into our next section, which is looking at inclusion and accessibility itself and how are they related, really. So you can say accessibility is part of inclusion. You cannot be, you can be accessible, but you can't without being inclusive. But the bigger umbrella there is to look at it in terms of how inclusive you can be. So to include everyone means to look at diversity, to look at various ways in which people are able to access your content. And inclusivity is like really going many steps further and ensuring that people with disabilities are valuable members of the society, and they should be able to access your service easily without additional means to to get to the content that you have. Say, for example, you're booking an appointment with your GP. Are you providing alternate ways for people who can't access your content on the web, for example? Not everybody uses websites even. Like, I don't think my dad would be booking appointments on using a website. So inclusivity means also looking at non-digital users, right? How do we make it easy for them to get that task done? So just want to hear a little bit from yourselves on what sort of non-inclusive experiences have you had, just trying to reflect upon it, either something from the real world or on a website or an app that you might have encountered. Does anything come to mind at all? Think of when you saw something or you are interacting with either a website or a person.
I haven't, sorry, my name is Geraldine. I
Hello.
can't think of anything in particular for me, but my mum is in her 80s and stuff like banking and things, like it isn't just the online stuff, even dealing with banks
Yeah.
themselves in person is made so unbelievably difficult. And after my dad died, because he was the person who did all the banking and things like that, it just was impossible for my mum to basically get anything done. She can't, but even things like TV sets are so complicated. Setting up digital, even me and my sister-in-law, my brother are ripping our hair trying to set her up and stuff. So it just seems like a lot of very ordinary things are just designed to exclude old people, and then they drive
Okay.
people, other people who are like, I'm good with computers, and it drives me around the bend as well. So there isn't enough time taken, and we could get into the arguments for why that is. I have my
Yeah.
own suspicions. But anyway, I think from my experience trying to deal with trying to help my mum, it's been impossible for her. If she didn't have children, I don't know what old people do when they don't have someone they can trust to help them. I really do not know what they do. It's terrible.
Absolutely, yeah. It is quite scary to be in that
Yeah.
position.
Yeah.
Yeah. And we've all, I think many of us have seen that, seen somebody struggle. It could be your grandparents or your parents struggle just using everyday services that we so easily take for granted, and we just tap away at our phones. We're almost doing it so sort of unconsciously,
Yeah.
without thinking. Then how to make this easy as possible for people who have some disabilities and are not able to do that. So I'm
Yeah.
seeing some comments here, videos that don't have captions, absolutely. Um, Somebody who has suffered brain injury find it challenging to process multiple pieces of information on the screen that require quick actions.
Mhm.
Yeah, you haven't
I,
seen Italian bureaucracy filling
uh,
the tax
I just want to
return.
I just have a question on that. Like, I would say that something like that, where a person has cognitive issues, those I would say are not I wouldn't classify them only as accessibility or inclusivity issues or not taken into consideration. But I think from a general UX point of view, also it's something that the designers have not considered enough to know the response time or the impact that multiple pieces of information could have on any person. So I think when you start looking at a diverse set of audience, this kind of concerns come to light way more prominently than restricting your audience to say that, oh, XYZ can complete 5 steps in 5 seconds.
Yeah,
So while it may be something that comes to notice because of a disability, it could actually be a concern to any person with even normal capabilities as well.
absolutely, Khushbu. Thanks for adding that. And yes, there's also bureaucracy that somebody has highlighted. Everybody that filling a tax return form, I've suffered through tax return forms. It's very painful. And if you have a disability or trying to do it with a disability, it's impossible. I myself have needed a lot of help through Google and people just to get that right. Applying for a public sector job requires a degree in law to understand the jargon used. Yes, the language, the jargon is something we absolutely deal with. And when you're an organization, the bigger the organization, we've all experienced more bureaucracy within big organizations, and we tend to project that bureaucracy through the complex language, lack of transparency in how we communicate to the outside world through the website, and how we write things for the outside. Do they need to know our internal jargon? Do they care about it? They don't. They don't want to know all that. So how can we keep the language really simple and communicate in a way that people understand, and it's easy to work through that?
I think as well, Rashmi, I noticed that going back to my mum again, because that's the experience I have. People, for example, like she decided to buy herself a new mobile phone and she went into, I can't remember, one of the mobile phone companies in town. And, the man dealing with her, I think was probably only 22 or 23. He ended up selling her an unbelievably complicated phone.
Oh my God.
Now it's not his fault. He
Mm,
just, nobody trained him to take a look at a woman in her 80s and say, is this woman, and ask her, what do you want your phone for? She's not gaming. She's not doing, she's not on
yeah.
Instagram. She wants to phone people and she wants to send texts and she wants to take photographs and at a push, look at her email. But then it has 50 million apps. It needs swiping. It needs good dexterity. It needs to have a mindset that she's beyond at this
Yep.
point. It's not
Yeah.
that she can't learn. She doesn't want to learn it at 84. She just does not want to do that. So I think there's a training element to people who just don't really see it, which is fair enough. I mean, I wouldn't necessarily have seen it either. If in my 20s, I
Mm.
wouldn't have noticed. whether an old person could do something or not.
Absolutely. It is the hard part for designers as well,
Yeah.
to strip away complexity. And we are trying to do that constantly. And it is a process. It is a process that we iteratively get better at. But that's the thing. We have to constantly keep iterating to make your language simpler, to make your interface simpler. Can we remove what's not required? Just throw it away. And most of the things are things that are worth throwing it away, binning them. And that's the bit I struggle with personally at work. Convince your client, and what is this exactly doing? What value is this bringing to your customer? And do we need to have it here shouting out so loud, or can we take it off? And often the proof is in the pudding. So the proof comes from user testing data. It comes from accessibility testing of what people are actually having pain with, dealing with. I will move on. We are halfway into the time, and I wouldn't like to go way beyond 1 o'clock. So I want to share some examples on inclusion versus accessibility. I think many of you can relate to these sort of examples where, something is accessible but not really inclusive. You go into, here's your gender, tell me what gender you are. So there's only a male or a female, or you see other, or you see not specified. So that again, it comes down to your language. Where are there options for you to select beyond a male and a female if you're not a non-binary? So here are some good examples of what to do in that case. Woman, man, transgender, non-binary, non-conforming, or prefer not to respond. So there's an answer there for everybody to feel included. I'll move on to other examples here as well. So this is less seen these days, but I still do encounter some very bad form fields where you actually limit the characters. Now think of double-barreled surnames, right? Now what happens if the programmer has limited input within that text field to maximum 80 characters and says no special characters are allowed? So if your name is John Henry something or something John Henry, you're not going to be able to type that. So you're either providing false information or you're simply unable to do it and you're frustrated. Now, the same fields can be accessible given you do a bunch of things like make it supportive for keyboard users. It's got to have visual labels. It's got to have a programmatic label to announce through screen readers what these form fields are for. Then providing instructions for screen readers through ARIA labels that tells the user what information that they are required to fill in each field. So given all that, you can still make these form fields accessible. But if you're going to introduce character limits, no special characters, that would make it extremely hard. So that's an example of something being not inclusive to your customers. And here are some other sort of visual examples here on how something, here is a shop display, image of a shop display showing a lot of mannequins. All of them are blonde, all of them are white. Again, does it represent a diverse audience? No, it's Vogue. I see it's Vogue. Vogue. Who are they selling to? Are they excluding people from diverse backgrounds, people with diverse religions, diverse capabilities? So that doesn't look inviting at all for if you want to come across as a company who wants to be inclusive, who wants to sell their products to everyone. And if you're using imagery on your website, be conscious of what type of imagery are you using. Is it a picture that includes, that has diversity? So these are better welcomed than a diverse audience than somebody, say everyone of the same race, same color, same ability. So that's a little bit of do's and don'ts examples. We'll talk a little bit on designing for inclusion. Many of you are designers here on this call, so you already know what designing for inclusion is. This example here, which shows this is Microsoft's guide for inclusion, design for inclusion. So we talk about there are different types of disability. It's not everything is permanent. I had carpal tunnel syndrome for 1 year or so. I had tennis elbow going on for many months. I needed a ergonomic mouse. I couldn't lift a bottle of water. I couldn't even lift a glass of water. It was so painful. So those were temporary disabilities. And somebody who wears glasses and goes on a bike in the rain, I'm blinded. Now, again, that's that's a situational disability, right? Or you're wearing a mask. During COVID, we all wore masks, and people with glasses suffered extra bit because the moment we went into a shop, all the condensation would hit and I would be blinded. I wouldn't be able to see anything at all for a minute or something. So those are, again, situational disabilities. How can we design for situational disabilities, right? Imagine if you are a mom, you have a baby to look after, you literally have one hand available and the other hand is not. So can you operate these things with one finger without making mistakes, with one hand, without hitting a very accurate target that you need to? So all that is very much part of inclusive design. Also think of somebody who is stressed out, right? There's so many times when you are stressed and you're not able to see something right in front of you. You're not able to see that button. You're not able to see that piece of text that's right in front of you. That's because your brain is stressed. And under stress, we don't really see things. We don't perform well. So can we keep our interfaces simple, without jargon, minimalistic, with lots of space, sizes that are big enough that people with visual problems can see it clearly as well. So if you want to talk anything about your own experience of how painful it was when you had a temporary or a permanent disability or a situational disability itself, feel free to bring it into this discussion.
Hi, I can share my situational disability.
Mhm.
So I wear glasses, and when I use a VR device, so I had to wear my contact lens, otherwise I can't use that.
Mhm.
For Apple's Vision Pro, you have to wear contact lens to use that. So I don't know if their designers gonna improve that to allow people who wear glasses use their products. Oh, I just feel like it's not that inclusive to people who wear glasses.
Yeah, that's a really good example. Yeah, I tried wearing what's that Facebook's device, right? The big virtual reality thing. It's a big device that sits on the head, and because I wear glasses, it's absolutely impossible to get that fitting my face. It's not designed for people who wear glasses at all. So I have to wear my contact lens if I want to do anything in virtual reality, using that VR set.
I believe Apple have a range of, I think, 700 common lens prescriptions that will fit the Vision Pro to cover as many people as they can.
That's really good, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I can express my experience. I had a condition at some point where I became colorblind, which is extremely rare for women. And as a designer, a visual designer as well, I was working on icons and stuff like that. And it was really, really quite impressive to see my color deficiency become more and more acute. And after 3 or 4 months, it became right. And so I can absolutely attest that some of the at the time was VCheX and all of this software are actually quite good at representing color vision. And also there was something about brightness where everything that was white started to become kind of more prominent, and I can see that's sort of common. So yeah, it made things really, really hard to read.
Yes, that's another thing I've seen aging people experience. They're not able to read the same color contrast that they were able to read when they were younger. So color contrast is a very tricky subject. I believe Roger has given a whole talk on just color contrast, and he's able to speak about the complexity of color contrast, which I will skim over a little bit in a while. I think I'm conscious of time, so I will move on to the next section here. What is the cost to individuals and to businesses when we compromise web accessibility, when it is neglected? One, yes, very poor experience, of course, and there is loss of customers because your customer will go away in looking for something else. And then if you are a public sector body and you have made a service not very accessible, then they are liable to be sued, and that damages a business's reputation, of course. Let alone just the reputation, there's enormous cost involved to even deal with that legal battle. So that's something you don't want to get into. I've taken these figures from Clickaway Pound report that was published in 2016 on these figures, that there is an estimate to online spending power of people who have access needs in the UK, and that is put down to 24.8 billion pounds. So of all the, if you look at like 1 million websites homepages which exhibited failures in WCAG 2, this is coming from a report where we've analyzed lots of homepages, million of them. 97.8% of them were found to be non-compliant or not accessible. And that's a lot. And you see 69% of disabled online customers, they just go somewhere else to find what they can find because of the inaccessibility of the service. And what is lost in terms of money, business, is 17.1 billion pounds. That's an estimate for the whole of the UK. So that's a lot of business. And what people don't often see, the biggest arguments I've heard from clients when we design for them is our users are not going to be disabled. Oh, hang on, this is not a service. We won't have any disabled people. I've heard that so many times. And then you start testing with people, and then the hundreds of problems are emerging. And that's the way I convince clients to even start looking at it as an area worthy to fix. Otherwise, they are losing customers, and they haven't equated the amount of loss of money that they don't know. It's in the don't know space. I will now move on to a little exercise here. If you scroll down to the yellow panel, which says responsibility of digital accessibility, you can drag and drop the stars. Now, there are a lot of roles out here. I suppose many of you have worked within product teams or IT teams, or if you are or if you have been any of these roles, and if you think whose responsibility is it to make digital products or services accessible, drag and drop the stars where you think this person is responsible for making things accessible. Do we have any product owners or product managers on this call? No. I'm just trying to spot a trend out here. What are we thinking as a group? I see a lot of votes are going into the front-end developer, the designer, the user researcher, product owner, product manager, technical lead. What about somebody who's a technical architect? Have any of you if any of you has worked with technical architects within your team? Are they designing solutions, keeping in mind that something is accessible? And also somebody who is who's always concerned about security as well, right? Are they designing solutions? Are they thinking of solutions which are accessible while they go ahead with one solution that they've gone with because something is more secure? I've often seen in my experience how security trumps accessibility, that security is taken so seriously. It's put way above. You wouldn't compromise on security, but you would compromise on accessibility. And this is the general attitudes that businesses have. yes, security is something you shouldn't compromise on, but what often people don't see is there is a worth, there is a business worth to not addressing accessibility. So yeah, it's good to see you all recognize how many of these roles are sort of almost equally responsible for delivering a service that's accessible. I want to move on next to the section of do's and don'ts in terms of what are the most common accessibility mistakes. This is coming from WebAIM. So they've analyzed millions of web pages, especially home pages, right? And they've analyzed what were the worst errors or the biggest errors that came out. So the biggest errors that did come out, number one is low contrast, and that's something we see again and again. How easy is this to fix? We're going to just go a little bit also on how easy are these things to fix. The second biggest problem that has emerged is missing alternative text. Now alternative text is, if for those of you who don't know what alternative text is, if you have a image on your website, this image, if it is required to communicate something, say for example you have infographics, right? And if that infographics is a snapshot showing various data image, and that needs to communicate. You can't just leave it like that for people who are using screen readers. People who are sighted are able to see it, but for non-sighted users who are reliant on screen reader reading information out to them, we need to make sure that all images have alternate text. So that's another biggest problem area. The third is empty links, just having links with for it to go nowhere. It basically is a problem with content governance. For those of you who are into content design, you will relate to that. And missing form labels is the fourth biggest problem. So missing form labels are things like fields in which you type things in, but for non-sighted users, they are reliant on screen readers to announce to them what they're meant to do. What is it a field for first name, last name? What are they meant to enter in there? Empty buttons as well, buttons which don't announce to non-sighted users what they are, and missing document language, because your screen reader relies on what language it is supposed to read that page in, right? And if that's missing, it's not going to know what to read it in. So I will go through a few examples of each of these 6 big accessibility mistakes. So low contrast text is the worst because you can't really read it. And color contrast is not just as simple as meeting that 4.5:1 ratio for normal text, right? So YCAC defines regular text as 16-point, larger text as 18-point or larger. And if it is bold, it can be 14 points. So there are a lot of these variables, you can say. One is the size of text. The other is the style. Is it bolded? Is it italics? And what type of font it is? So how big is that font? And what is the color of that text as opposed to the background? So there are various tools you can use. This widget here is a color contrast analyzer, but you can use WebAIM itself to analyze your page, and it will tell you what it fails for. So here's an example where I tested something where the foreground color was that, and the background color was the gray foreground color, white, and background color was a sort of a light gray for this example here. And what it said was it failed AA, it failed AAA, and it tells you what it fails for. It fails for regular text, it failed for large text. So just looking at different examples as to what these things look like. Regular text at 16 pixels versus regular text at 16 pixels, regular text. All 3 of them are regular text at 16 pixels, but you see the saturation levels are very different and the ratios are very different. So while the left one is not compliant, the other 2 are still compliant. to AA or AAA standards. And we can have a whole conversation with Roger on color contrast itself, but we'll move on to see a few other examples on what missing alternative text could be like. So again, infographics are most essential to be conveyed, but there may also be other images which you would like to convey to non-sighted users. So in that case, if an image has alternative text defined like this, like if you go into a website and if you right click and say inspect element, and you can go into the code and you can see if this image of a lady holding who's a non-sighted person holding a walking stick, and that image is described as image alt equals image of Charmaine from our interactive map. So that's what it is reading to the non-sighted user. So one, it is a little bit subjective of what image you choose to put alt text on, but any text which is classed as non-decorative, it is best to have alt image descriptions on them in the code. Now, if something is empty, right, say this image on the left of a cat, it has no alt text image, but it's image underscore 584792. And that is what your screen reader will read. Total jargon nonsense. It means nothing to users. So always ensure that when you have images, meaningful images, there is alt text put in the code. We'll go next into empty links, which is on the third biggest accessibility mistake. So there are, if you use a tool like Wave, which is a plugin, you can install it as a Chrome plugin. You can go onto a web page and you can click on Wave and it will tell you what all the accessibility errors it has found on that page. So here, just a little screenshot of that error it has shown of, there are these icons floating around social websites, social media icons, but they haven't really been, they have missing links. They will go nowhere. They're just there with missing links. So the Wave accessibility tool helps you identify what's missing on a web page. So if it is linked, it will go somewhere. So one is to be conscious of every element on a web page where it's supposed to go is linked properly, and it has meaningful links as well to land in the right place. The other is missing form field labels, which I spoke about a little bit before. Now it should have an ARIA label attribute if you go into the code, for those of you who deal with any front-end code at all. And if the form label is not present or it is empty, the screen reader will simply say something like edit. Edit has autocomplete, or edit text blank. What does it mean? What does it mean to anybody? It doesn't inform what they're supposed to type in that field. And the fix is pretty simple. If for somebody who writes code front end, and the code snippet here is label for equals first name, input type equals text. So you're telling the screen reader what to announce when the user uses their tab and lands on that form field element. It announces them what is this field and what are they meant to type in there. Again, empty buttons, the fifth biggest common accessibility mistake. So empty buttons, which go nowhere, they don't announce. They don't basically announce to the screen reader what that button is. If it is a search, it's not telling the screen reader what it is. And the fix is, again, pretty simple to use this alt equals whatever it is. If it's a search button, it should say search. Visually, it might say search, but programmatically, if it is not there, it's not announcing to the non-sighted users. And you can also use ARIA described by equals search icon. So the screen reader would announce to the user that it is a search icon. We'll go to the sixth biggest common accessibility mistake, which is missing document language. And it is the first thing you will see really. So if I go away here, I'm on Gov UK site now. I'm gonna inspect element and see, of course, Gov UK is a very good example to look at. So if you see where I'm pointing at, lang equals n. So that's your cue for the screen reader to say this is something it should read out in English. I have a very simple exercise. It should take a couple of minutes. We'll go down to accessible language exercise, where I have on the left-hand side a few language bits like psychoneuroimmunology. On the right side, I have the opposite. So the opposite is trying to describe it, studying illness from stress. Again, on the left, I have the dog bit Katie, which is active voice. On the right, I have Katie was bitten by the dog. On the left, I have BYOB. On the right, I have bring your own bottle. So on the left, there is a descriptor, generally big blocks of paragraph. On the right, I have bulleted list. And below that, I have a very long sentences, very long width of text in a container, as opposed to something much shorter. It's the same content, but much shorter. Can I ask you to pick up either the tick marks or the cross and put ticks for things which you think are more readable, more accessible language, crosses for this is not accessible. I see there is a little bit of confusion around the active and passive voice. We will examine that further, why one is better than the other for readability. I must say you all have some very good knowledge and understanding of what is more accessible language. I'm going to scroll down now into a bit of explanation around that exercise. So I've taken some statistics from American Press Institute, which is very interestingly, it says the longer your lines of text are, the harder it is to understand for everyone. 8 words long is 100% comprehensible. 14 words long, 90%, 43 words long, 10% comprehension. So there is definitely your readability goes down as the line of text goes longer and longer. So next time you see it, just catch it and fix it. So up to 75 characters per line is what is good for readability, around 75 characters, and that includes spaces. And the general rule of thumb is to write in plain English, avoid jargon, no matter how complex the subject is, a very technical field, a very medical field, you can still write simple enough for the recommended age. There is a recommended age here, the aim for reading age of 9. Right? Okay, so personally, I use a few tools out there to help me write simpler, because writing simpler is not easy and it's a learned thing. And I use a combination of ChatGPT as well as Hemingway Editor or rewordify.com. I use a combination of these to help my draft get easier. So we're just going to see how we can do that. So if I go into, give me a moment, I'm trying to navigate to here. Okay, so I've put a piece of text here in Hemingway app. It's basically something we were trying to come up with for NHS web page. We're trying to describe the page with a short descriptor. And this was the draft that I saw, and I wanted to see, okay, how readable is this, or how complex is it? So I put this into Hemingway app, and it told me that big yellow highlight. It's one sentence which is hard to read. It highlighted. Adverbs, using adverbs are good. It meets the goal. So if you have very hard sentences, it goes into red. So it gives you a nice color coding and a scoring. It tells you the readability score is for grade 10. Now, grade 10, it says, okay, it's just okay, but aim for grade 9. So then I took that piece of text and I put it into ChatGPT and I asked it, can you make this easier to read? So it came up with a variation. So I stuck that variation back into Hemingway app, and it improved. It basically said, okay, it's good. It's grade 9 level. So I routinely use this because we don't often have the luxury of working with content designers. I hardly ever. So, the more each of us are aware of and can suggest to the business that this is the improvements you can make to the written language we have on this web page, the better it is going to be for your team. I also use rewordify.com, which is again a free tool. You can enter a piece of text here and it will give you something much simpler. I really love this example here I'm going to read it out. His elder daughter's nephritis was comorbid with chronic hypertension and sciatic neuropathy. I couldn't even read that well, but that is very complex. So it changed it. So that can easily be written as his older daughter's kidney disease was long-lasting high blood pressure and leg nerve-related nerve disease. Now that is something a younger person can understand as well, and that's what we should be aiming to do. So that's just a few examples I have here. Anyone here who hasn't used ChatGPT and Hemingway app sort of tools to just improve your writing? And if not, I do highly recommend it. It does great edits. And I've put down some external resources here. Home Office has a great resource on just readability, accessibility guidance for everything to do with readability. Then there's Gov UK's content design, a whole manual on how to design content well, including content management. Great set of resources to look into, and links to Hemingway Editor, Rewordify as well. I'm conscious of time. We are 4 minutes past 1 o'clock, and I want to end by with this card here, which is a reminder for us. How can we cultivate a mindset to be more inclusive from the start and not let accessibility become an afterthought? So there are 4 principles that I practice and I like to advocate for, and that is I heavily recommend that we engage with people with lived experiences who have different disabilities, and that's the best way to learn. I use a lot of Chrome extensions as well to look into simulators. They sort of give me an idea, but they can never show me what a person with a lived experience can show me. To see things from their eyes, from their mind, is a total eye-opener. Every user testing session with a person with a lived experience, I come out like, wow, I never knew this could have been a problem. And I'm always learning as well from people. And to involve users with disabilities while designing and develop products and services. The biggest, I would say, stumbling block here is your business would say, I have no budget, or we have no budget to recruit people with disabilities. It would just cost a lot. I have a simpler way of going about it. If it has not been baked into costs right from the beginning, one way to go about it is to look within the organization itself, people who could volunteer, and that's what we do within NHS. There is a group where people volunteer to lend their time, and these are people with different disabilities. So we test with them in cases of extreme low budgets, but we still learn a lot just by testing with 5 people with a range of disabilities. And to evaluate that technology for accessibility before you choose to use it, because I have come across projects, I've been in projects where big IT projects are being delivered worth millions of pounds, where somebody has chosen a technology that has not been considered at all for accessibility. Trying to build a UI or no UI. Tableau, for example, Tableau is the tool that's coming to my mind. Or even Power BI. Power BI may be slightly better for accessibility, but Tableau, if you're asking your users to go into Tableau and, it's very, very difficult. And imagine if Tableau were to sit into an organization's secure data environment, say NHS, many of their services sit on their secure data environment. It severely restricts accessibility. Screen readers are not able to get into the environment. You can't tab onto elements. You can't even order tab to function in a logical way, top left to right going in a F pattern, right? So none of it is possible. So there's something here for people who choose technology as well, and people who that when you audit for technology and tools, that you audit it for accessibility as well. And to bake accessibility into the code, there were some snippets I shared earlier of how you can bake accessibility into the code. And that's how we can avoid these 6 big mistakes by becoming more aware in the first place. Yeah, and I will end my talk. If someone wants to, if anybody has questions, please.
That was brilliant. Thank you so much, Rashmi. I'll stop the recording now, just if anyone wants to ask questions.